Hello to everyone. Welcome to a new podcast. The wisdom pattern, order, disorder, and reorder. Welcome to all of you. It's going to be very interesting when we go through all these sessions, and I hope that it will be meaningful to all of us, including me. This is your pastor, Yeti. Let's start with the preface. Order. By itself normally wants to eliminate any disorder and diversity, creating a narrow and cognitive rigidity in both people and systems. Disorder, by itself, closes us off from any primal union, meaning, and eventually even sanity in both people and systems. Reorder, or transformation of people and systems, happens when both are seen to work together. The great spiritualists and philosophies often thought this quite directly, but with different vocabularies, symbols, and metaphors. Native peoples called it the cycle of day, night, sunrise, or sun, moon, sun or summer, fall, winter, spring. Scientists speak of star, supernova explosion, vast amounts of light and energy. World mythologies present stories of journey, fall, return to a new home. Religions often use some form of birth, sin, rebirth, or law, failure, forgiveness, or all is okay, catastrophe, hope. The Bible presents it as Garden of Eden, fall, paradise. Walter Brueggemann, a great theologian, I think one of the greatest, teaches three kinds of psalms: psalms of orientation, psalms of disorientation, and psalms of new orientation. There are three sections to the Hebrew scriptures: law, prophets, wisdom. Speakers and writers often refer to 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. Johann Fichte, 1762 and 1814, called it thesis, antithesis, synthesis. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, 1866-1949, called it wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Philosophy speaks of classic or essentialism, postmodern or existentialism, or nihilism, process or evolutionary philosophy. Chemistry illustrates the pattern through solution, dissolution, and resolution. Paul Ricoeur, 1913-2005, spoke of first naivete, complexity, second naivete, or first simplicity, dangerous, recalibration, and second simplicity, enlightened. The recovery movement speaks of innocence, addiction, recovery. Many now just speak generally of construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction. Christians call it life, crucifixion, resurrection. Given the prevalence of this recurring theme, it must now be considered culpable blindness that most people still consider it somewhat of a surprise and scandal, a mystery, or something to be avoided or overcome by an easy jump from stage 1 to stage 3. This is human hubris and illusion. Progress is never a straight and uninterrupted line, but we have all been formed by the Western philosophy of progress that tells us it is, leaving us despairing and cynical. Perennial philosophy in an updated version, we are indeed saved by knowing and surrendering to this universal pattern of reality. Knowing the full pattern allows us to let go of our first order, trust the disorder, and sometimes even hardest of all, to trust the new order. 3 big leaps of faith for all of us, and each of a different character. So let's start our first session now. The current dilemma. Before you speak of peace, you must first have it in your heart. We have been called to heal wounds, to unite what has fallen apart, and to bring home any who have lost their way. The postmodern opportunity. One reason so many people have lost heart today is that we feel both confused and powerless. The forces against us are overwhelming, including consumerism, racism, militarism, individualism, patriarchy, and the corporated juggernaut. These powers and principalities, Ephesians 6 verse 12, seems to be fully in control. We feel helpless to choose our own lives, much less a common life, or to see any overarching meaning in it all. This became all the more evident after the horrific terrorist attack of September 11, 2001. Everything that had seemed so important, stock options, consumer choices, increasingly affluent lifestyles, suddenly faded. Church attendance increased immediately. Religious websites experienced a surge in activity. We saw a wave of patriotism unseen for decades. Some people even had the courage to look into our collective conscience and start questioning if the developed nations have been doing enough to help eradicate poverty worldwide. In the 2 decades since 9/11, we have seen additionally fractures developed in American society and around the world, along with global threats such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Patriotism has become divisive rather than inclusive. That surge in church attendance is a distant memory, and smaller churches are further challenged as worship moves online through months of social distance. There is much less belief in the possibility of a common life than there was in the months after 9/11, although shelter in place is bringing out a few hopeful signs, such as balcony sing-alongs and spontaneous online gatherings. It's clear that America is not the only country struggling with these issues. All of this points to a long-standing, deep need for social reconstruction that we must urgently address. More than anything else, I believe we are facing a crisis of meaning. The world seems so complex and we seem so small. What can we do but let the waves of history carry us and try to keep afloat somehow? Perhaps we can at least look to that same history for some patterns, or for those who found the patterns. In that sense, this is a very traditional sessions we're gonna go through, all of us. That's why I invite everyone. Even though many of these patterns form revolutionary suggestions, I will point particularly to the man who has one of the longest bibliographies of anyone in history, an Italian friar called Francis of Assisi, 1182 to 1226. He must have had some kind of genius to have attracted people in so many cultures and religions, and to seem contemporary in so many of his responses 800 years later. Francis' context and reference points. St. Francis of Assisi stepped out into a world being recast by the emerging market economy. He lived amid a decaying old order in which his father was greedily buying up the small farms of debtors and moving quickly into the new entrepreneurial class. Francis stepped into a church that seems to have been largely out of touch with the masses. He trusted a deeper voice and a bigger truth. He sought one clear center and moved out from there. His one clear centerpiece was the incarnated Jesus. Francis understood everything else from that personalized reference point. Like Archimedes, Francis had found his one firm spot on which to stand and from which he could move his world. He did this in at least 3 clear ways. First, he walked into the prayer depths of his own tradition, as opposed to mere religious repetition of old formulas. Second, he sought directions in the mirror of creation itself, as opposed to mental and fabricated ideas or ideals. Third, and most radically, he looked to the underside of his society, to the community of those who had suffered, for an understanding of how God transforms us. In other words, he found depth and breadth and a process to keep us there. The depth was an inner life where all shadow, mystery, and paradox were confronted, accepted, and forgiven. Here he believed God could be met in fullness and truth. The breadth was the actually world itself, or the breed, the white was of the world, a sacramental universe. It was not the ideal, the churchy, or the mental, but the right in front of us and everywhere. The actually as opposed to the ideal. Francis also showed us the process for staying there, the daring entrance into the world of human powerlessness. His chosen lens was what he called poverty. And of course, he was only imitating Jesus. He set out to read reality through the eyes and authority of those who have suffered and been rejected and come out resurrected. This is apparently the privileged seeing that allows us to know something that we can know in no other way. It is the unique baptism with which Jesus says we must all be baptized. Mark 10:39. The baptism that transforms is larger than any religion or denomination. It is taught by the Spirit in and through reality itself. We can argue doctrinally, and we do, about many aspects of Jesus' life and teaching, but we cannot say he was not a poor man, or that he did not favor the perspective from the bottom as a privileged viewpoint. All other heady arguments about Jesus must deal with this overwhelming fact. Francis did, and this perspective became his litmus test for all orthodoxy and for ongoing transformation into God. For Francis, the true I had first of all to be discovered and realigned the prayer journey into the true self. Then he had the experience himself situated inside of a meaning-filled cosmos, a sacramental universe. And finally, he had to be poor, to be able to read reality from the side of powerlessness. Francis taught us, therefore, that the antidote to confusion and paralysis is always a return to simplicity, to what is actually right in front of us, to the nakedly obvious. Somehow he had the genius to reveal what was hidden in plain sight. It was so simple that it was hard to get there, and it will take the rest of what we're going through, all new sessions to come, to explain such simplicity. The age of the mind. How did we get so far from Francis' world? What we call the modern age emerged in the 18th century, Enlightenment. It was the age of rationalism. The Enlightenment produced a wonderfully scientific mind. Its materialist worldview taught us how to measure things. Belief hinged on what could be proven by a certain paradigm called science. Science assumed, and this because the arrogance of the modern mind, that it knew more than anybody else ever had. It did not yet realize that this new knowing was limited to small areas. In its newfound excitement, such knowing quickly neglected other areas. Analysis of parts became more important than a synthesis of the world, of the whole. We have been dazzled by our new abilities to know for 3 centuries now. The modern mind is enthralled with its ability to make things happen, to rearrange genes, chromosomes, and atoms. Being able to predict outcomes feels like an almost godly power, and it is. It led us to a philosophy of progress as opposed to most cyclic or Pascal worldviews. Asia is the source of most great religions, in that more harmonious worldview, that and life, along with everything else, need to be kept in balance. In contrast, we prefer to think that we can overcome that mystery. Modern people believe that things will only get better and better. This worldview has taken many surrogate forms and shaped all of us deeply, especially in the West. It told us that education, reason, and science would make the world a better place. But then, the Holocaust happened. In the very country that was perhaps the most educated, logical, and reason-loving in the world. For Europeans, the collapse into postmodern thinking began at that point. If we can't be this wrong, maybe nothing is right. Or all our major institutions failed us. For Americans, by reason of our isolated from the absurdity of war, our immense power, and our incorrigible innocence, we remained in the modern era until the late 1960s. For the last 50 years, we've begun to speak not of modernism, but of postmodernism, a critique of modernism, false optimism and trust in progress, where in the postmodern period now, at least in Europe and North America, and those countries influenced by them, which is for better or worse, almost every country, we now see that reading reality simply through the paradigm of science, reason, and technological advancement has not served us well. It has not served the heart or the psyche well. It has not served community well. There must be something more than physical, because mere science has left us powerful and effective, but also ravaged in the most important areas of our humanity. The inner world of meaning has not been fed. The soul, the psyche, and human relationships seems at this point to be destabilizing at an almost exponential rate. Our society is producing very many unhappy and unhealthy people. The spread of violence throughout society is frightening. We're seeing that the postmodern mind forms a deconstructive worldview. It does not know what it is for, as much as it knows what it is against and what it fears. To have a positive vision of life is almost considered naive in most intellectual circles. Such folks are not taken seriously. They are considered fools. If we cannot trust in what we thought was logic and reason, if science is not able to create a totally predictable universe, then maybe there are no patterns. And suddenly we live in a very scary and even disenchanted universe where no intelligence appears to be enlarged, where there is no beginning, middle, or end. What's left is merely the private ego with two own attempts at episodic meaning and control. We find this in the postmodern novel, the deconstructivist art, and movies with aimless directions and gratuitous violence. This is the world in which most of those living today were formed. They starved from meaning, grasping at anything and everything. There's a lot to think about. Let us stop here. We have a lot to absorb and to think about. Because this is the reality. What do you see around you? What do you see in yourself? Our next session will be to know and not to know, and so much more in this. Make us heart prayerful, Lord, thoughtful, Lord. For those who live close to us, for those who are around us. And guide us with your Spirit. Amen. May your heart and mind be open to reflect on what you just heard. And may it help you to take steps. And let's start with your own environment. May God bless you. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye-bye.